Welcome everyone back to the channel and the broadcast. Paul, recovered addict, Peterhead, Scotland. Glad to be here, glad to be clean. Clean by the grace of God, the company I keep, steps I take, literature I read. And I'm really, really pleased to be joined today by Matt.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Matt W. and I am a recovered addict.
Brilliant.
Thank
Thanks
you,
for
Paul.
being here. Glad you're here with us. Thanks for taking time to carry the message. So there's lots of content on the channel, family, and lots of different podcasts. We've got podcasts on each of the steps, and we've got, I think, getting on over 24 personal stories like this one on the channel. There's podcasts on the traditions. There's Spiritual Malady, the ABCs of addiction, the psychic change. There's a whole host of content here on this YouTube channel, folks. So feel free to listen to those other broadcasts. You can pause, rewind, fast forward, share. Maybe you're here and you're looking for support. Feel free to put your first name and your number underneath wherever you see this posted, and we will get back to you. We have current male and female sponsorship lists, which we can send you directly via WhatsApp. So if you're looking for sponsorship, let us know. On the screen, there's going to be readings from our basic text, Alcoholics Anonymous, often called the Big Book, as well as other readings. So bear in mind you can pause and screenshot those things. So I'm really pleased to be joined today by Matt. Without further ado, Matt's come along to share his experience, strength and hope. It's over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Yeah, as I said, my name is Matt and I'm a recovered addict, and thank you for asking me. It's always good to try and give back to the fellowships that I'm a part of, because I'm a drug addict as well as an alcoholic. So I qualify for a couple of fellowships. And it's always a pleasure to share my experience, and that's what I try to do. I try to come away from opinions. I try to come away from what I hear in the fellowship, because what I've experienced is the fellowship message is very different to the big book message, and I think over the years, I think that message has become more and more distorted. That's kind of where my experience has been. So I'm going to share a little bit about, my upbringing. So my upbringing was, I come from a loving family, although my parents split up when I was 13, 14. I had a lot of pressure from me from my father from a young age, because he was a professional sportsman, and quite a professional one, quite a famous one. And I followed in his footsteps, and wanted to be like him, in the same sport, a professional sports person. So I had this huge pressure from a young age to try and emulate what my father had achieved. So one of the earliest memories that I have was this chronic sort of feeling of wanting to please my father, and please people around me. So I can remember clearly, people pleasing from a very young age, not really understanding who I was, but just wanted people to like me. Now, I don't believe those things are alcoholism or addiction. I believe they're human traits, but I believe they are exacerbated in alcoholics and addicts. From listening to countless shares and countless stories, I've been able to identify with that quite a lot. So I always had that feeling of, I suppose, growing up, never feeling a part of, always feeling apart from. But I hadn't even experimented or started drinking or using at that time. My experience is not when I was 14, I picked up a drink or I picked up a drug and that was me, I was off and running. That was not my experience. Sometimes I wish that was my experience, because I believe it would have been a lot more clear cut from an early age, and I wouldn't have spent 8 years in and out of 12-step fellowships trying to recover from alcoholism and addiction. There was always one more attempt by me, and one more failure. And in the end, it was alcohol and drugs that were the great persuader. They finally beat me into a state of reasonableness. They had me in a corner. I was nailed to the ground. I didn't take the first step in recovery, or step one. I never took it. Those steps took me. And when I felt that, and I felt what it was like to be taken by those steps, I was able to build upon a structure. So as I grew up through my 20s and my late teens and my 20s, those traits that I've shared about from a young age were kind of always there. I was always looking for exterior stuff to fix the way that I felt inside. Which I later know is, the spiritual malady. I was maladjusted to life. And I was always searching for something to make me feel better. Whether it be a new girlfriend, a new house, a new job, a new watch, a new city to live in, anything you can think of to take away where I wouldn't have to experience just sitting with me. That is the thing. That's the key thing. I just wasn't unable to sit with me. So I had in this equation, I started to drink more and I started to use drugs, and you know what? It was great fun. I loved it. I'm not, the person that says, that I'm bitter about, that I couldn't drink normally or I couldn't use normally. I didn't, I'm not that type of person. I don't look at it like that. I loved drinking and using drugs. It was fun. It talks about it in a vision for you, doesn't it? It says, for most, normal folk, drinking means conviviality, care from, joy and boredom, and all the bits that go with it. And that's at the beginning. That's how it was for me. But as Bill Wilson talks about in his story, he says, little did I know I was forging, and I'm paraphrasing here, he was forging a boomerang that would later come back and cut him to ribbons. And that's my experience now when I'm looking at that. So, I can identify with the big book. I can identify with my experience with the book. So, and it was very simple. At the start, my drinking, I had no consequences, and I didn't feel guilt or shame when I was doing it. When I was drinking and using drugs, I still had friends. I was going to, West End nightclubs. I was holding a job down. I had money in my bank. I had a house. Life was good. But what I started to gradually realise is the more I did it, the more I needed, and the more I felt that I wanted to experience that high. So it wasn't, once every couple of weeks or, going out and using. It was, wanting to do it more often. And when I was doing it more often, that's when it was still fun, but there were consequences. And here I am in the consequences, but still hanging on to a job, still got my house, still in a place where, I'm not experiencing, huge financial consequence or loss of friends and family but there were certainly more consequences arriving. And then by the end of my drinking, my very last day of drinking, it was all about consequences. But this is the thing, I never cared about the consequences in the end. I'd gone past the consequences. I didn't care. I'd gone past caring. I just knew that I couldn't stop drinking and using on my own power. I tried so many times. One of the things I remember when I first sort of come in to experience 12-step fellowship, and I initially come in through a treatment centre. I was in a treatment centre for 4 weeks, and then I got out, and one of the things that was quite early on that I found really useful was on page 44 of the big book. There's 2 qualifying questions that will help you diagnose yourself, because I don't diagnose myself. When I'm working with others, I'm not diagnosing them. They are diagnosing themselves through the information that I give them. It talks about, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot stop entirely, number one, or if when drinking, you have little or no control over the amount you drink, you are probably alcoholic. 2 questions only. And you know what? That was a game changer for me. And I'd read this book, but there was only 2 questions. You can go onto Google and you can think, am I an alcoholic? And you can come up with 30 to 40 worksheets, different types of worksheets with, 20, 30, 40, 50 questions on them. And I was a master manipulator. So therefore I could manipulate those answers to how I wanted them to be to make it fit into my narrative. But those 2 questions really were black and white in the end. Because I knew I was an addict. I knew I was an alcoholic. But it didn't avail me anything to start off with. So when I come out of that first treatment centre, I knew that I'd had a problem, and I managed to get a couple of months sober, and I went back out again. When I think about that experience, I know why I didn't get it that time. So by that time, my wife had left me, I'd gone bankrupt, I had all of these other consequences going on, fired from my job, all of this stuff, that we've all experienced, not everybody, but most. I went back out again, and I stayed out for a few more years, and I single-handedly tried to manage as best I could, that ended up burning my life to the ground yet again. Went into another treatment centre and then come back out. Managed to get 2 years sober and clean, 12-step fellowships, sponsoring people, helping others. And I drank again, and I used again. And then eventually, on July the 2nd, 2017, I had a spiritual experience. It was a moment of clarity in a position where I was surrounded by drink and drugs, and I had enough of those things to keep me occupied for a few days. But it was a moment of clarity in amongst the madness of I just can't do this anymore. Something had shifted. I'd felt a change. And I always remember that for me, it's page 30 of the big book. It says we learned that we had to concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholic. The delusion that we are like others, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. That is the first step in recovery. So it's not the first step we admitted we were powerless over alcohol and lives had become unmanageable. It's what I just said on page 30. Now, until I experienced that, until I really knew what it was like to fully concede to my innermost self, I couldn't achieve anything. Nothing worked. Because how I looked at the steps were distorted, because I'd never conceded. This is my experience. Some people concede over time, but if people concede over time, all they can really do is agree with the first step, how it is written, and not feel it deep within. So it was at that time that I knew that my time was up, and I became open to spiritual matters and spiritual help. because I knew there wasn't another option. I was either going to throw myself in front of a train or hang myself, or I was going to mumble on as best I can. And that wouldn't have ended up in a good way at all. So through my journey, and I'm over 7 years sober now and clean, I've experienced many things. I've had 3 or 4 sponsors, different sponsors over that time. You know, some for different reasons than others. But I believe that, you know, in that time, it's through my growth and my journey, you know, where I've needed to, I suppose, grow in understanding with people as well as grow in understanding with the book. I'm not one of these people that says, you know, once you've taken the steps, you don't need a sponsor. I do believe that somebody, I don't like the word sponsor, but I think it's important that somebody is able to share their inventory and stuff that's going on, because that person might not be able to see the wood through the trees at that time. They might be praying and meditating and doing all the things they need to do, but sometimes a perspective can help. So it's about, you know, God knows what I'm doing anyway, but do I have the humility to humble myself further and talk to another human being about stuff? And I think that's the important thing. So with my new experience of finally getting step one, first step in recovery in step one, I've listened to so many different things about the first step. You know, the first step, you know, has something to do with honesty. Really? Does it? I was the most dishonest person in the world. So when I come in, does step one really have anything to do with honesty? It doesn't take a lot of honesty to run out of a burning building, because that's what it was like. Our book and our literature talks about a capacity to be honest. I'm not going to get honest straight away because I've turned up at my first meeting and I've read the steps off the wall. It doesn't work like that. So when I really understood this stuff, like I knew I was powerless, as it explains in chapter 7, more about alcoholism, chapter 3, more about alcoholism. You know, it talks about the insanity preceding the first drink. You know, what are people? What is the thought process, or lack of thought? That's the thing. That's the key. Because in step one, we're told to, you know, you need to watch out for irritable, restless, and discontentment. Well, if I look at the stories of Fred and Jim in the book, there was no irritable, restless, and discontentment with those guys. Yeah, you could argue Jim had a, you know, a bit of an argument with his boss, but, you know, generally his life was getting back together. And with Fred, there wasn't a cloud under the horizon. So I think sometimes we can give people the wrong message, and we can say to people, all you need to look out for is irritable, restless, and discontentment, when in fact, I drank when I was happy, when I was sad, when I built my life back up, and I would tear it down, and I would build it back up, and I would tear it down, and I'd be walking by a pub, having woken up that morning, set, not even thinking about drinking, and there I was, banging at the bar, asking myself, how did it happen? Walking, you know, on a Friday afternoon, thinking, you know what, I'm just going to have a shandy, believing that the lemonade will neutralise the alcohol. Mental twist, as Jim experienced with his whiskey and milk. You know, I'm unable to recall with sufficient force, page 24 italics, the memory of the suffering of even a week or month ago. It doesn't come into my mind that the week before, you know, I'm crying to my mum down the phone, and you know, and I'm at the lowest I could be, and I'm swearing, I'm saying to my girlfriend and my mum and my father, I'm never going to do this again. I'm never going to do this. I'm never, and I mean it with every fibre of my being. And then I go and do it again. Baffled, absolutely baffled. It baffled me that I would keep doing it, powerless, completely powerless. So when I understood these things about what being powerless was, I knew that if I stayed in step one, I was going to drink and use again. Because step one's great. It gives you great information. There's 103 pages of the big book. where it talks about on how to take the steps. Anything from 103 to 164, there's some fantastic information around step 12, but there's no directions. So the directions finish at 103. But step 1 is 44 pages plus the doctor's opinion. So 52 pages of the 103 pages is about step 1. Step 1 is a pretty big deal. If as a sponsor, you're asking your sponsees, are you powerless over alcohol? And they're saying, yeah. And you're saying, is your life unmanageable because of it? And they're going, yeah. And then you're going, great, that's step 2. That ain't what step 1 is. There's a lot more to it than that. Because alcoholism is a lot more serious than lack of control. It's a lot more serious than lack of control. The crux of the problem centers in my mind rather than my body. So if I cannot just take the first drink, the phenomenon of craving is irrelevant. It doesn't come into play. If I just don't take the first line, the phenomenon of craving is irrelevant. So how can I stay away from it? Well, I tried every method possible on my own power. Different people, different environments, different drinks, different drugs. You name it, I tried it. And it's only when I was out of ideas that I had a chance. It was only then when alcohol and drugs, and cocaine in particular, beat me into a state of reasonableness. I often hear as well, cocaine was my drug of choice. I hear that a lot. Alcohol was my drug of choice. Really? It was my drug of no choice. I had no choice. So it's these little things that we hear in the fellowship that can't be tallied up with a big book. So once I understood what powerlessness was and what unmanageability was, because for a long period of time, I thought my unmanageability was the consequences. And it wasn't. That's not why my life is unmanageable. My life was unmanageable because I could not take the first drink or line. Nothing to do with the fact that I lose my job, my wife, my money, my friendships, my family. That's nothing to do with it. That's the consequence of an unmanageable life. So when I really grasped the true state nature of the first step in recovery in step 1, I had a chance. So if I don't get it, it distorts my belief the rest of the program. Step 2 was easy. I've got a friend of mine in America who is a priest. And he said to me, Matt, an alcoholic priest, he said, Matt, I misunderstood step 2 for 20 years. And he was a man of God. A man of God who misunderstood step 2 for 20 years. He said, I was asked 2 questions in the end. I was 20 years sober and I still didn't get it. I was asked, do I believe that there could be a God? And I said, well, yeah, there could be. I can't prove that there isn't. And do I believe that God could do for me what I couldn't do for myself? Well, you're the proof. You're sober, and there's many people clean and sober with happy lives. So I've got to say, there is some proof. That's it. Step 2 done. And I found that life-changing. Because the key word in step 2 is power, not belief. We're not asking to come in and get honest at step 1 and then tell everybody what we think and believe about God in step 2. That's too much of a tall order. Bill Wilson didn't set us up to fail. Power, with a capital P written in step 2, is the key word. So once I grasped the hopelessness of my condition, these steps fell down like dominoes. And when I got to step 3, just before step 3, and I was looking at the 3 pertinent ideas, and it says underneath them, being convinced. Was I convinced? I was absolutely convinced. So I had no problem taking step 3. Step 3 is a funny one because we hear a lot, don't we? Yeah, we hand it over, we turn it over, we hand it over, we turn it over, we hand it over, we turn it over. But actually in step 3, we don't turn anything over. You look at the wording of it, it says we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And I use this analogy and I find it helps. 3 frogs on a lily pad, one decides to jump off. How many are left on the lily pad? Most people always say 2, but there's 3 because one has only made a decision. Only made a decision. So taking step 3, I am making a decision to take the remaining steps. And when I'm taking the remaining steps, I'm turning my will, which is my thinking, and my life, which is my action, over to the care of God, not God. Over to the care of God. Bill Wilson talks about placing himself unreservedly under the care and direction of God. It's down to me to put the action once I receive the direction. It's really important. Step 4 was relatively simple for me. I just done a fearless and thorough moral inventory. I didn't hold anything back. I'd done it quickly. I wasn't stuck on step 4 for a year. I had it done within a week because I knew lack of power was my dilemma, and I knew I was going to drink and use, and I knew I needed to get access to that power quickly because the steps are not the solution to alcoholism. The steps are not the solution to alcoholism or addiction. If we're talking about the book, what the book says is a vital spiritual experience as a result of taking the steps is the solution to alcoholism. And the steps get me there. If I take the steps, I cannot fail but to be contacted. I cannot fail not to be contacted. That's my experience. So I shared everything in 5 and I had no problem with it. I didn't have this epiphany or this amazing thing. I just remember my sponsor saying to me, Matt, you're going to awaken spiritually somewhere between steps 5 and 12. And that was my experience. Step 6 and 7, are really important steps, but there's only a paragraph wrote about them. But again, keeping it simple, defects and shortcomings mean the same thing. Defects and shortcomings mean the same thing. And I cannot, working on my character defects on my own power is about as useful as me working on my alcoholism. It doesn't work. The much needed power wasn't there. So I practice this stuff because I have conscious contact with God who guides me, praying for the knowledge of the will, the correct use of the will. So my defects of character are very simple. My first experience with my sponsor, I had 30 character defects. And I've come to know through studying this book and talking to people and sponsoring a lot of men and women that actually, you know what? If we keep the character defects at fear, selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment, that's all we need. Most character defects will fit under those. In fact, all of them will fit under those umbrellas. So this whole thing of I've got 60 character defects, it's of no use. Of no use. So I made my list in 8. My list was from step 4. I knew I needed to go and clear the wreckage of my past. I knew the importance of it. I knew that if I didn't, I was going to drink and use again. And I went and done it. I made all my amends in step 9. Now I'm in the live game of life. And when I'm working with people, I don't say to people, you need to go and make 5 amends before we step 10, or you need to make 1 amends before we start step 10, or, they've got their list. The willingness has to come from them. The willingness is indispensable. And in the end, the willingness for me, I didn't lack willingness. The willingness has always remained. The big book is one reason for relapse: failure to grow and enlarge your spiritual life. Not going to meetings, not calling my sponsor. Failure to grow and enlarge my spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others. That's the reason for relapse. And if you grasp the true nature of your hopelessness in step 1, my experience is you never run out of steam. The willingness remains. The willingness remains. So steps 10 and 11, they interact with each other throughout the day. Step 11 being the 24-hour plan on awakening and on retiring, and step 10, we're looking, it talks about, we're looking for fear, selfishness, dishonesty, and resentment. Because at this position in the steps now, we've cleared the wreckage of our past. We're going out to our fellows in 9, and we're now in the live game of life. Because my step 4 stuff and the harms and the resentments that I had were what was blocking me off from God. I've discarded all of this now. I'm going out to repair the wreckage. I've shared it with God and another human being. And here I am with a pipeline clear to God. I feel connected and I'm living. It's like someone said to me once, it's like crossing the white line at Anfield. When you cross the white line at Anfield and you're playing in front of the Kop and you got 50,000 Liverpool supporters, you can't run back into the tunnel, into the changing room. You're there. You're in the live game. And that, just little things like that really helped me understand what it was all about. So I continue to take inventory. I'm looking and I'm watching the fear, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment. When these crop up, not if, when, they are going to crop up. I'm a human being. They are going to crop up. They are. When it interacts with step 11, it's always good to read the On Awakening thing, because when I read that and I looked at some of the directions, it talks about asking God to divorce me from self-pity, self-seeking, or dishonest motives from the moment I wake up in the morning, tapping into the power, going through my day in my head. Where could I fall short? Seeking the power of God. If I have no plans or I don't know what to do, I'm asking for an intuitive thought or a decision. I'm seeing where I can be of use to others. What can I still do for the still suffering, sick, alcoholic and addict? It says we pause when agitated or doubtful. The amount of times I've had to pause when agitated or doubtful and ask God for the next right thought or action. Because what I'm doing is I'm clearing up as I go along in my day. I'm making amends if I've fallen short with somebody. I'm able to ask God for a different direction before I'm about to act out on dishonesty or fear. I don't get it right all the time. But I shoot for spiritual perfection and I settle for progress. I shoot for it. So by this time, I've had my spiritual awakening. I've changed. People can see it, and I feel it. And my job now is to be of maximum service to God and the people about me. There's nothing I can do for my sobriety today. I tried to manufacture it on my own power and I couldn't. So God has given me the gift of sobriety. All I need to worry about is practicing these principles in all my affairs. And when all else fails, nothing so much will provide immunity from alcohol and drugs than intensively working with another. Chapter 7, working with others. So when prayer and meditation and all this stuff, and I'm falling short in my life and I'm having these trials and tribulations, but I'm working intensively with that guy on Tuesday and I'm working intensively with that woman on Thursday and I'm trying to help people, that will save the day. Because working intensively in steps 12 stuff, in my experience, isn't putting out chairs at meetings or making teas and coffees. I actively go out to try and help drunks and hopeless addicts. And as a result of that, I come into the recovery with no partner, no kids, no house, with nothing. 7 years on, I have a beautiful wife that's never been a part of my drinking and using. I have 2 wonderful children, 6 and 3 months, never been a part of my drinking and using. I have a useful whole life today. I've recovered from alcoholism and addiction. It says that in the step 10 promises. The problem has been removed. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We recoil from it. I react sanely. I've been restored to sanity. Can I get sick and relapse again? Of course I can, if I stop growing and enlarging my spiritual life. I'll fall back on my power. I'll be without defense against the first drink or drug, and I'll pick up again. But God willing, I haven't run out of willingness. I've not run out of steam. Continue to move forward. And I'm a very grateful recovered addict. I'll leave it there.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mark. Thanks for sharing. That was a strong share, my friend. Yeah, much about solution and clarity. Lots of interesting insights there. Yeah, I really enjoyed listening to you. Much to think about there, food for thought. Yeah, just very briefly, family, a bit of due diligence, some halftime announcements. If you're looking for sponsorship, maybe you're brand new to the program, the fellowship, the steps, the literature, podcasts, keep coming. Come to some meetings. In a few moments, there'll be a screen up that you can take a screenshot of about meetings that run every day. So bear in mind, you can pause, rewind, fast forward, share this broadcast wherever you wish. You can take a screenshot of that information in a few moments. If you're looking for sponsorship, a sponsor is someone that's been through this process and is ready, willing, and able to take you through the 12 steps so you can be freed from the hideous delusion of drinking and drugging and find a new lifestyle. So if you're looking for sponsorship, put your first name and your number, and we will definitely get back to you. Also, there's lots of other broadcasts on the channel. Check those out. Yeah, so I want to thank you, Matt. That was really deep. I was listening to you, and yeah, you do hear a lot of half truths in meetings. There's no doubt about it. And I think in early AA, what I find helpful, I'm certainly not an expert in anything, but I do enjoy a little bit of knowledge about early AA, Matt. And they would say to people, you have to spend time with your creator in the morning. You have to help people every day. And you have to build your personal relationship with God outside of the meetings. Quite how you do that, we don't, but you have, well, you don't have to. If you don't, it's unlikely you'll stay clean. It's unlikely you'll stay. And this is the kind of thing they would say to you. And things were quite strict in those days. You would be interviewed. And I'm not saying we should do this, but this is just how it was. You would be interviewed before you could go to a meeting to see if you were serious about sobriety. They weren't playing. They weren't playing. And then you would be assigned a sponsor and you'd be given instructions. And it's a great process. It's a great way to live. And the solutions to be in the solution. They often say, don't they, when you're in the world, if you learn a trade, the best way to develop your skills is to teach somebody else, and it's each one teach one. And I loved what you shared about conscious contact. I loved your message, Matt. And, I loved what you had to say about accepting progress, aiming for that. You said something like aiming for the best, but accepting progress. And I thought that was profound. So, recovery is a journey, isn't it? And ultimately it's a higher power that leads us and teaches us and guides us, and I felt it was a very measured share and a wise share, and I think acknowledging that there is a higher power means that generally, I've got a measured approach to this process and this truth, because it is ultimately down to a higher power.
It is. And I concur, Paul, with what you say. I think every comment you've come back to me on is spot on, and I agree. If we've said to ourselves we're beyond human aid, right? If we're beyond human aid, then we need to find a power greater than ourselves by which we can live by. So that means that fellowship is not going to keep us sober, as good as it is. And I like meetings, and I've got some wonderful friends, and I do service in meetings. The solution to alcoholism and addiction is not in meetings. It's taking these steps and practicing these principles. That's where the solution is. And we are lucky enough in this day and age to be able to go to meetings and to try and find and help people with this illness and help them recover. I can't take anyone through the steps. I can help them with the steps. And I don't work the steps either. How can I work something that, is spiritual in nature? 12 steps of spirit, 12 spiritual principles, and they're beyond human manipulation. And through practice of these, the steps start to happen to me. I'm not wearing them like a straitjacket as I once did. There's an element of that being rigid at the start. But as I've grown in recovery, I've found that I've kind of wear it a little bit more like a loose coat. That's my experience. And it's very hard, Paul. I don't know what you think of this, but when you're really passionate about the message that's contained in the book, and it's very hard sometimes not to come across when you're doing a main share as preachy. And I don't ever want to come across as preachy. I want to share my experience with the steps as I found them, as I've grown in understanding. But I think it's a real big thing, Paul, that people understand that the solution to alcoholism and addiction is in the steps, and it's not in doing 10 meetings a week. It's dependent upon finding power greater than ourselves. Lack of power was our dilemma, not lack of people, money, jobs. And I'm very passionate about it. I'm a big book enthusiast. That's what I like to call myself. I'm always in it, studying it with people, helping people, growing in understanding and effectiveness. But I like what you said, Paul.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah. It's growing in understanding effectiveness, I love holding hands and singing Kumbaya, but while I'm taking this breath, an addict somewhere is taking their last breath, this is a progressive fatal killer illness. And, I've buried a lot of people, and I'm sure you've lost people as well over the years, Matt, and so the exercise relay is growing in understanding effectiveness. And I hear you about share, because when we put ourselves out there, we often connect that with self-image and self-worth, and we wonder how we're heard. But it's really, a bird doesn't carry a message, it sings its song. If you're free and you've got experiential truth in this process, then that is 100% valid. Self-worth says that the basis of the fellowship, at that time, he didn't say it was steps or literature or meetings. He said it was one alcoholic, a recovered alcoholic, sharing their understanding and experience of sobriety with another. And that's what we do. That's what you and me are doing right now. It's my ideas, it's your ideas, it's our understanding, current understanding, which will likely evolve, but it's our current appreciation of the process, literature, steps. And once I learn a little bit more about myself, and my tendencies around drink and drugs, once I learn a little bit more about higher power, I learn a little bit more about literature, steps, fellowship. The next thing then is to grow in understanding effectiveness, because quite possibly I'll get a call today from someone that's in a bad way. What have I got to offer them?
Yeah.
And ultimately it's God's work. It's a higher power's preparation of their heart, of my heart, and a message from a higher power. That's all. Well, that's what's going to cut the mustard. If it's not that, it might sound great and give them a pat on the back, and I might give them some comfort. But if it ain't God, it's unlikely it's going to have any lasting effect. And I'll make this last point before we let you back in, Matt. My exercise is this ongoing spiritual experience. And what I've discovered is, which I'm sure you already know, is morning devotions, nightly inventory, attending Zoom meetings and in-person meetings, listening to the message, prayer, contemplation, journaling. All these actions produce that shift and sustain that shift. Because once that person's had this shift, they're easily able to control any urge to use a booze, which I just think is amazing. I've seen it happen. I'm sure you have, and I've seen it not happen by people making those choices not to do the things we instruct them to do.
Yeah. No, I concur, Paul. Look, I was just thinking about what we were talking about, from when I finished the share to the depth of conversation that we were having around recovery, big book steps, and God. And sometimes I think to myself, if in meetings we just shared our common welfare, which is alcoholism and addiction, and what it was like and how we recovered from it, and our experience with the steps, I think the message would be a lot more powerful. And if we left everything else to having a one-to-one conversation with sponsors, I think people would be coming into the meetings and getting and understanding this program at a deeper level. And like you say, we're really lucky, aren't we? Because I have this plan today that, when I get off the phone to you, I'll be working with somebody later today, but I'll be watching myself for all these things, these character defects, fear, selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, to see, where I could possibly fall short. And when I'm retiring at night, when I do my inventory, which is the back end of step 11, I can scoop up everything that I've missed that day. Sometimes I have nothing to write because I've caught it and I've seen it. But sometimes I can go, actually, I was fearful then. Oh, that was for a few hours, but I missed it. I missed it. And I'm writing it down, I'm discarding it. At the end of those questions, I'm asking God, what corrective measures can I take? And I can go to bed, close my eyes, knowing that pipeline to God is clear. Do I need to say anything to my sponsor? Do I need to speak to somebody about an action that I've taken, maybe is wrong? Humbling myself with him and humbling myself with another human being. And my experience is just like yours, Paul, practicing this stuff. I haven't thought about drinking or using drugs for years. The problem has been removed. That's my experience of the Step 10 promises, and I'm passionate about it, mate, as I'm sure you are.
It's that ongoing shift, isn't it? You have to be in it to win it. I have to take these actions, and my experience has been is prayer is best started before I open my eyes, even if it's just 30 seconds, before I open my eyes, and then straight into something of a spiritual nature immediately. Now grace does carry us, but it is an action thing. That's why they're called steps. I believe there's steps towards higher power, steps with a higher power, in order that you might learn to walk with a higher power. And furthermore, I believe that people, because you become a recovered man or a recovered woman, you stand in God's power, accountable to God. And you stand on your own 2 feet. We don't need to bow or scrape. I mean, I work with others, but I'm not a doormat. If I'm going to commit 20 to 40 hours working with a man or a woman, occasionally a woman, then I need to be sure I've got that level of commitment and willingness. It's not, I don't take it lightly. These people, call me anytime. And very often, the louder they are, they just like the idea of the willingness, rather than being willing to commit 30 hours to somebody. It's a big deal, but conversely, that is the solution. It's in the giving you receive, and if you do God's word well, then those that feed others never go hungry. My wife used to work as a waitress a long time ago, and she was never without food.
Yeah, no, look, it's yeah, you're right. Everything you're saying, we were actually pretty well aligned, Paul, which is always good when we do things like this. It's good to be aligned with the person that you're speaking to. My experience of working with others is, well, my experience was, until I had finally fully conceded to my innermost self, I would run out of willingness. When I experienced that step and I felt it, I'd never run out of willingness. Willingness is indispensable. So we talk about willingness, open-mindedness, and honesty. Willingness is indispensable. That's the one that's indispensable at the start. And we just need the capacity to be honest. We don't get honest at step 2 or 3. I can't go from being the most dishonest person in the world to the most honest. It doesn't work like that. What I always say to people that have asked me to help with the steps is, I will say to them, I'll give them all the information. I will say to them, I will give you 110% of my time if you give me 110% of your time. And we find out very soon, Paul, don't we, whether someone lacks the willingness. You find out. I remember Chris Raymer saying, if 20 people ask you to sponsor them, say yes to all 20 of them. Get them to read the doctor's opinion and highlight it, and that gets rid of 17. It's an interesting one.
Yeah, it really is. And the miracle of recovery. Firstly, I'll just say this briefly. The louder the noise at the outset, very often, it doesn't last particularly long. My experience has been people that say, "Oh yeah, all this, give it a few days, and will-o'-the-wisp, they're gone," and not taking calls, not keeping appointments. And God has given them free will. They have their journey, I have mine. Personally, if someone leaves me sitting around with a notepad and a book 4 times in 10 days, then I'll send them the list and wish them well and tell them I don't mind having a chat once a week, but I'm not prepared to sit around. I've done that, you know what I mean, making appointments and people not showing up. So I have my own personal take on that. Now, this business of seeing people set free, I have a friend, Matt, and he came along to our group, one of 3 sons. One of his brothers had topped himself, the other had died by overdose from heroin, and he was in a hotel room. This is a real guy, and he's now got 3 years, 3 months, and his wife had lost her husband. He'd been put out of the family home. His little girl, I think she was 3 at the time, had lost her dad. He's now got 3 years, 3 months, maybe 4 months, continuous clean time. What did he do? He came along, he took some suggestions, he got a sponsor, he went through these steps, he got service quickly, and he kept his service, and that proved to be a key element, caring for others in the give and receive. Great guy, real guy, and that's 3 years plus of a man having his wife, a wife having her husband, a man having his child, the child having its parent. And these are the kind of miracles you get to witness over a period of time. And you can't buy it. It's priceless. The true treasure is folk, to see people set free. And it's God's work. It's all God's work. So I just want to say, before I invite you back in for any closing remarks, that does bring the end of today's broadcast. But there is a whole host of other podcasts just like this on the channel, family. Now, on this screen is a list of meetings. All these meetings are on every single day. The UK Samaritan's number is at the bottom right, as is the CA UK helpline. Come along to meetings, folks. You're not going to be demanded to speak. You can come along and listen, and you're not going to be demanded to put your camera on. Indeed, most people. So don't be put off coming along to Zoom meetings, fretting about how you're going to be treated. These are healthy meetings, and they're on every day. And you're very welcome, and you'll hear messages just like this gentleman's message today. So take a screenshot of this. And once more, if you're looking for support, maybe you're new to all this, honesty, willingness, open-mindedness produce results. A big part of recovery is showing up. So would you like to come in for a minute or two with any closing thoughts before we wrap up, Matt?
Yeah, I'll just finish off. For anybody that's in and out, struggling to get it, I eventually got it. I didn't stop trying. Alcohol and drugs became the persuader in the end. So I want to give anybody hope. I was in and out for 7 or 8 years, couldn't get it. So that's the hope. Whilst you're still breathing, you've got a chance. But don't be so arrogant to think that you can come back tomorrow and do it again tonight. Go out tonight. Do whatever you need to do this weekend. Don't think that you can just come back, because you might not. Many people don't. I'll leave it there, mate.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for your time and being here, carrying that message of hope. Okay, family, stay safe, stay strong, and we'll be back soon in another broadcast. Once again, thanks, Matt.
Thank you, Paul.